There's been a lot of discussion in recent weeks, and unfortunately, this update might not sit well with longtime Raiders fans. But before we break it all down, let me remind you, before listening to the latest news, subscribe to the channel, like it, and don't forget to press the bell icon. Let's move on to the new news. Now, let's talk about a major development. The Raiders might not hold training camp in Napa in 2025. While this isn't officially confirmed, all signs point to the team continuing their off-season work in Henderson, Nevada. Raiders fans, especially those who loved the Napa training camp tradition from 1996 to 2019, might be disappointed. But in the grand scheme of things, what really matters is how this change will impact the team's performance. On top of that, the NFL has just approved some major rule changes for 2025. These changes will affect not just the Raiders, but every team in the league. Some of them could significantly impact the way the game is played. I'll break them all down for you, explaining what's important and what's just technical jargon. So, let's get into the biggest rule changes and how they could shape the future of the Raiders. Let's break down what this new rule change really means for the Las Vegas Raiders. Right now, the Raiders need a reliable return specialist, and this rule could make a big difference. The change is expected to increase the number of kick returns, which might give a player like Trey Tucker, who excelled at returns in college, a greater role. With the running back situation still uncertain, having a strong returner could be a game changer. Last season, teams started adapting to the new kickoff return format, using running backs more often to take advantage of the structured return setup. This year, the NFL has taken things further by adjusting the touchback spot to the 35-yard line. That means if the ball lands in the end zone and isn't returned, the receiving team gets much better field position. For the Raiders, that could lead to more scoring chances. A crucial factor here is kicker Daniel Carlson. He's got the skill to place the ball exactly where it needs to be, preventing opponents from automatically starting at the 35th. This could be a huge strategic advantage for the Raiders. NFL projections suggest that return rates will jump from 33% last season to around 60 to 70% in 2025. That means special teams play is about to become even more important, and for a player like Trey Tucker, whose speed and acceleration are top tier, this could be the perfect opportunity to prove himself under the new regime. Now, let's move on to another major rule change: overtime. Starting next season, both teams will be guaranteed a possession in overtime, even if the first team scores a touchdown. This aligns the regular season with playoff rules, preventing games from being decided just because one team wins the coin toss. This rule change is a direct response to classic playoff matchups, like that unforgettable Chiefs versus Bills showdown, where teams traded blows, but one side never got a final shot. With this new rule, the Raiders and every other team will have a fair chance to answer in overtime. Up next, let's break down another critical rule change that could impact how the Raiders approach the 2025 season. One thing is clear: the new overtime rule gives both teams a fair shot at scoring, and for a team like the Raiders, this could be a huge advantage. With a coaching staff that includes several former college coaches, the Raiders might look to bring elements of the college game into their NFL strategy. In college, overtime starts at the 25-yard line, and while the NFL isn't going that far, this change could encourage more aggressive and balanced gameplay. Now, let's talk about another major rule change: the expansion of instant replay. The NFL has decided to give replay officials more authority to correct clear and obvious mistakes. This means they can step in on plays involving face masks, defenseless players, horse collar tackles, tripping, and roughing the kicker. However, one glaring issue remains: there's still no replay for roughing the passer, a call that has sparked controversy time and time again. Raiders fans know all too well how frustrating bad officiating can be. We've seen questionable calls influence games, and some teams, like the Kansas City Chiefs, seem to benefit more than others. But with this change, the NFL is putting pressure on its officials to be more accurate and accountable. If a call is clearly wrong, they'll have the power to correct it on the spot. That's a step in the right direction. Now, let's move on to another rule that directly affects roster management. In the past, when teams made their final roster cuts down to 53 players, injured players often created tough decisions. The Raiders, like other teams, had to make difficult choices about keeping or cutting guys who weren't fully healthy. But under this new rule, teams can now designate 2 players to return after roster cuts, essentially expanding the roster to 55. This could be a game changer for players on the bubble, especially those recovering from minor injuries. Instead of being cut outright, they'll have a chance to stay with the team and contribute when they're ready. This gives the Raiders more flexibility in building their squad and ensures they won't lose valuable depth just because of timing. And there's more. Let's break down the next major rule change and what it means for the silver and black. The NFL has made a small but important change to roster rules, and it could be a game changer for the Raiders. Instead of teams being forced to cut down to 53 players and then reshuffle their roster within 24 hours, the league is now allowing 2 players to be designated for injured reserve, IR, immediately. This means teams can carry 55 players before making final decisions, giving them more flexibility. For the Raiders, this is a major advantage. Injuries have been a problem in recent seasons, and this rule ensures they won't have to cut a player today just to bring them back tomorrow. Now, they can strategize better and keep valuable depth while managing the IR list more efficiently. But that's not the only big change. Another rule adjustment increases the number of designated for return DFR players from 8 to 10. Why does this matter? Because last season, injuries hit the Raiders hard. When key players went down, the team had to scramble to fill spots, often relying on less experienced backups. With this new rule, they'll have more options to bring players back from IR, keeping the roster strong even when injuries pile up. Building depth has been a challenge for the Raiders in past seasons, but this change could be the boost they need. Instead of relying only on top-dollar stars while the depth struggles, they can now structure the team in a way that allows them to stay competitive through the season. And with 2 new hires in the strength and conditioning department, the team is clearly focused on staying healthier and stronger for longer. Now let's talk about another tweak that could impact the Raiders: the new point differential tiebreaker for waiver claims. Up until now, the waiver order was based on draft position for the first 3 weeks of the season, and then it switched to win-loss records. Now, if 2 teams have the same record, point differential will serve as the deciding factor. This means that if the Raiders are battling another team for a waiver claim, the margin of victory or loss could determine whether they get the player. While this isn't a massive change, it does add another layer of strategy, especially for teams looking to rebuild. But the biggest impact might come from a new set of free agency rules. At first glance, they might not seem like a big deal, but once you break them down, it's clear. They could actually work in favor of the Raiders. Let's dive into those next. Let's talk about a new rule change that could give the Raiders an edge in free agency. The NFL has approved a 1-year trial allowing teams to have a video or phone call with up to 5 unrestricted free agents during the 2-day negotiating period. Not only that, but teams can also make travel arrangements for these players as soon as they reach an agreement. Think of it like the NFL's version of a college recruiting visit. In past years, teams had to rely almost entirely on agents for negotiations. Now, players can actually meet with coaches and front office staff directly before making their decision. And here's why this is a huge win for the Raiders. Las Vegas is one of the most attractive destinations in the entire league. Imagine being a top free agent and getting a personal call from the Raiders staff, followed by a trip to the entertainment capital of the world. If you're choosing between a visit to, say, Cleveland or Houston versus a weekend in Vegas, the choice is easy. The bright lights, the energy, and the city's appeal could be a game changer in convincing top talent to join the silver and black. Beyond that, this rule also helps fans get a better sense of the team's direction. Just like how the NFL holds top 30 visits for draft prospects, this new rule will give insight into which free agents the Raiders are seriously targeting. At the end of the day, anything that makes it easier to attract top talent is a win for the Raiders. And with this new approach, the team might have an even bigger advantage in landing key free agents. Now, let's move on to more rule changes and see how they could impact the Raiders moving forward.